Hi folks, John the Maven here. Thank you for your interest and your attention. Hope you're having a great day. Today I'm going to be sharing my thoughts on the debate between WebcamParrot and Swagkage about Kakuzu versus Pain. Now this debate is a few years old by now, but nonetheless people are still having conversations about this matchup, and this debate is a great starting point for people who are curious about what some of the arguments are on either side. And as I listened to the debate myself, I found that the process of trying to support or refute the claims being made by either debater encouraged me to go back to the source material and develop a deeper understanding of the scenes being discussed. That whole process was a lot of fun, and also changed the way that I look at some of this stuff. And that's the reason why I'm making this video. In addition to providing my own commentary and sharing my thoughts, I'm hoping this could potentially be a reference point for people interested in this topic, to hear some of the early arguments that were exchanged on the subject, to have additional context for some of the points that are being made, and to have clarification for some of the strengths and weaknesses of both positions. Okay, with that being said, just a couple of quick notes before we get started. Given that this is a commentary video rather than a live reaction, I am going to be pausing the debate pretty frequently to share my thoughts, particularly early on in the debate as the debaters are establishing their premises, and a lot of points are being thrown out in quick succession. There are quite a few pauses with extended commentary back to back. The pauses get fewer and further between, and shorter later in the debate. Also, for full transparency, I removed a couple of harsh pops and clicks from the source audio, and I also shortened some of the longer periods of silence in the debate. Just to be clear, no edits were made to anything that the debaters said, and of course, there's a link to the original video down below. Last but not least, the intention of this video is to encourage conversation about a subject that we're all passionate about. All respect to both debaters regardless of any disagreements, and if you have opinions you want to share about the debate, about my commentary, about the matchup in general, I would love to hear them, whether that be as a comment or your own commentary video. Alright, with the housekeeping out of the way, Swagkage versus WebcamParrot, Pain versus Kakuzu, let's get into it.
Yeah.
Alright, well, why do you think Kakuzu would beat Nagato?
Because he's physically much more powerful than him, and he has a specific counter matchup against Nagato.
Is he so he's got something in his arsenal that like hits harder than Chibaku Tensei?
Yes.
He could tank Chibaku. What?
I'll just point out briefly that there could be a difference between Nagato himself fighting Kakuzu versus Nagato using the 6 paths of pain to fight Kakuzu. You might feel, for instance, that the strength of the Chibaku Tensei could be different depending on whether Nagato is fighting solo or controlling the paths of pain remotely. And that might affect the way that Parrot evaluates whether or not Kakuzu could break out of the Chibaku Tensei.
Yes, tailed beast bombs should be multi-continental, and I have a calc for Chibaku Tensei that only puts out small country level.
No, not you. No, Yugito's tailed beast bomb has to be weaker than Rasen Shuriken because Kakuzu tanked it.
So I think it's important that we clarify this right out of the gate because this gets referenced a lot later in the debate. The claim that Parrot is making is that Kakuzu tanked an attack from Yukito, that attack was a multi-continental Bijuu bomb, and the implication of that being that Kakuzu can both tank a multi-continental attack and output a multi-continental attack. The problem is that the attack that Matatabi and Yukito use on Hidan and Kakuzu in the fight that we see on panel is not a Bijuudama, it's a completely different attack. The Bijuudama all have this iconic black spherical look to them, which we simply don't see on display here. I think the confusion comes from the fact that it's fired out of Matatabi's mouth, similarly to how a Bijuu bomb would be fired, but it's actually a totally different attack, a fire-based attack. Hidan even comments that it's really hot and makes a joke about how cats should be sensitive to heat. Now, as far as I can tell, that attack isn't actually given a specific name in the manga. According to the Naruto wiki, it's given a name in Naruto Ultimate Ninja Storm 3, in which it's referred to as the Byoen Hoka or Cat Flame Roaring Fire Jutsu, so it's not a Bijuu bomb. To be fair, this debate is a few years old, and more recent debates are definitely aware of this. This is not some grand revelation, I just wanted to present this for clarity. Regardless, I don't think this qualifies as a multi-continental attack. If you look at the amount of damage that the Matatabi Fire Breath attack does to the environment, and compare it to, say, the amount of damage that's done by the Bijuudama later in the series, they're nowhere near the same. The building that they're fighting in gets blown up, and maybe some of the surrounding buildings get damaged too, but compare that to the massive impact craters that the Bijuudama have later in the series, and it's kind of a night and day difference.
Wait, why? No. The Rasen Shuriken ignores durability, conventional durability on a cellular level.
But how do
by
you know?
Tsunade.
Well, then why did the third Raikage tank it?
And because he just had better raw durability.
Why did Obito tank it? So exactly. Man,
but
why?
That just means that Kakuzu didn't have that Preta cellular durability.
So if you've seen the raw durability meme, this is where it comes from. And you know, I get it. It sounds a little silly, sounds like Parrot might be contradicting himself, but I don't think it's entirely justified. I think what Parrot is trying to say here is that there is a distinction between raw durability, aka the toughness of your skin or your natural defensive capability, and additional bonuses that you could attain through jutsu or similar means. In other words, there's a difference between how much damage you can take naturally and how much damage you can take with some sort of shield active. The former would be your raw durability. And the only claim he's making here really is that the third Raikage has higher durability than Kakuzu, which I wholeheartedly agree with. With regards to the Rasen Shuriken specifically, it is established that that ability has essentially an armor-piercing component. The whole ignores conventional durability or does damage directly to the cells is the way in which the Rasen Shuriken bypasses armor. Parrot is simply stating that the reason the Rasen Shuriken was so effective on Kakuzu was because of that armor-piercing capability, and the fact that it didn't work on the third Raikage is just because the Raikage was that much stronger. In other words, it's not an anti-feat for Kakuzu, it's a feat for the Raikage. So let's talk a little bit more about the third Raikage, because his durability feats, including his lightning armor, are absolutely crazy. Going and looking at the fight between Naruto, the Shinobi Alliance, and the third Raikage, Naruto doesn't actually manage to do any direct damage to him, keeping in mind that this version of Naruto is much stronger than the one that fought Kakuzu, including having access to Sage Mode, as well as having undergone the training with B that lets him sync up better with Kurama. That version of Naruto, despite having a much more powerful version of the Rasen Shuriken at his disposal, still wasn't able to use it to inflict any kind of meaningful damage on the Raikage. Still, I think it warrants further investigation to determine whether the jutsu has this property to it that lets it ignore jutsu-based armor. We get descriptions of the jutsu being like a poison or like millions of tiny swords directly attacking the cells, and how they sever the connection between the cells and the chakra networks. But that doesn't necessarily mean it would just outright ignore any forms of armor between the user and their opponent. It might be worth keeping that in mind as we proceed further with the debate.
And another thing to bring up is that Kakuzu's durability...
Where is it stated that it ignores durability? It can attack on a cellular level. That doesn't mean it ignores
attacking on
durability.
a cellular level, if it attacks the cells and destroys the cells independently, that's a form of ignoring conventional durability. Right? If Kakuzu doesn't have defenses that are that minute, then it can just slip between them.
Let's consider some other examples of ignoring or bypassing conventional or raw durability. Tsunade, obviously a character with extremely high durability, which includes her natural raw durability, as well as her access to things like Katsuyu and the 100 healings, which increase it even further. I hope we'd agree that Tsunade is much more durable than Kabuto and hits way harder than he does. But Kabuto was nonetheless able to inflict serious damage on her, not by using a super powerful strike, but by using medical ninjutsu to directly damage her organs. That is one form of ignoring conventional durability. Another very similar example to this is the Gentle Fist. Neji doesn't actually need to put much strength or physical power behind each one of his strikes, since he's able to send his chakra through the opponent's skin, bypassing their defenses and disrupt their chakra network. That's another way of getting around somebody's durability. So the question Parrot is really asking here is, what does Pain have that would similarly let him get around diamond armor?
Also, how did he let himself get hit by base Naruto when Sage Naruto blitzed him? Naruto blitzed Pain, I mean. Pain blitzed Sage Naruto. Fuck, I'm sorry, I'm tired.
Okay, so, it was actually kind of repeatedly shown that Kakuzu was a lot faster than Kakashi, for one, who was also reacting to those same pains, right?
Kakashi, who said he could beat Kakuzu if Naruto didn't show up.
Okay, so essentially the claim has been made that Kakuzu is much faster than Kakashi. I think we should examine that. And to do that, I think we'll need to look at several feats over the course of their fight, because there are definitely instances where Kakuzu gets the better of Kakashi, but Kakashi is able to respond to a lot of what Kakuzu does as well, and I think their speed is roughly comparable. Kakuzu does manage to grab Kakashi and then Ino and Choji later in the fight, but Kakashi also successfully reacts to several of Kakuzu's ninjutsu attacks. Kakuzu lands a kick on Kakashi early in the fight, but Kakashi also thinks he's dead at the time, so I think you could argue that he was caught off guard. Although, I suppose, you could present the fact that Kakashi didn't detect and respond to the attack as a speed feat for Kakuzu. But you could counter that by saying, well, Kakashi had already charged up his Raikage and was dashing towards Hidan at that point, which would qualify the feat for Kakuzu somewhat. The other instance is when Kakuzu manages to catch Kakashi with his worms after they jutsu clash. When Kakuzu uses his wind-enhanced fire jutsu, Kakashi responds to this with a water wall, which winds up creating a lot of visual noise, and Kakuzu is able to use that as an opportunity to maneuver up closer to Kakashi, grab him with his tentacles, and slam him to the ground. And that's definitely a feat for Kakuzu. He's able to use his elemental advantage to create a distraction, close the gap with his opponent, and strike him effectively. But that's very different from being outright much faster than your opponent. So let's look at some of the other jutsu exchanges that they have over the course of the fight and see how their speed matches up. So the first and probably most obvious thing to mention is that Kakashi does manage to kill one of Kakuzu's hearts by coming up behind him while he's distracted and using a Raikage on him. Now, granted, Kakuzu was being pressed by Inoshika Cho at that moment, but they had all been dealt with and were out of the way at that point, and Kakuzu even remarked that he couldn't even perceive Kakashi's approach or his attack. In other words, Kakashi, with his relatively loud lightning jutsu activated, was able to close the gap with Kakuzu, attack him, and damage him significantly before Kakuzu could even perceive this happening. Later on in the attack, Hidan says to Kakuzu, "Let's do the usual," and they start a combination attack against Kakashi. Hidan jumps in and starts pressing Kakashi with taijutsu, and it's at that point that Kakuzu fires the wind pressure attack on both of them at once. Then, Kakuzu turns around, faces the other members of the team, and fires false darkness at them. Kakashi manages to maneuver himself from the other side of the battlefield, away from Hidan, out of the range of the wind pressure attack, and in front of false darkness, and nullifies it with his own lightning style before it has a chance to impact the other members of his team. In other words, Kakashi, while already being pressed in taijutsu by another opponent, manages to get out of the way of that opponent, get out of the way of Kakuzu's first jutsu, navigate his way all the way around the battlefield, and put himself in front of the second jutsu in time to save his teammates. To be entirely fair though, Kakuzu does say to Kakashi, "You saw through my jutsu with your Sharingan." So you could potentially make the argument that Kakashi was only able to respond to the attack because of that ability, and you could say, okay, well, would Nagato, aka Pain, have a similar ability to respond to Kakuzu's jutsu? Now, I would personally argue that if you look at the reaction feats that Pain has throughout the series using the Rinnegan's shared field of vision, that any real difference here would be negligible, but I could see somebody still making that argument, and I think it's potentially debatable. The other major jutsu that Kakuzu uses, of course, is the Searing Migraine. I'll just point out that the whole team, including Ino and Choji, are able to react to and get out of the way of that attack without taking any damage. So once again, there doesn't appear to be any sort of vast speed difference between Kakashi and Kakuzu. If anything, Kakashi's demonstrated that he's able to consistently, on multiple instances, completely outmaneuver and outpace some of Kakuzu's jutsu, while only succumbing to them when he's either caught off guard or already at very close range.
No, he said that he could try to use... Do you have that statement? Can you actually show me that? Because I don't believe that's what he said.
Sure, yeah. Let me get it.
But anyway, so that would mean that Kakuzu should scale to that extent anyway. And also, Naruto tricked him using Shadow Clones, and the first couple times it actually didn't work.
So let's clarify the use of Shadow Clones in this fight and see if we can evaluate that statement that the first time it didn't work. Now remember, right before this fight, Naruto has been doing some training that specifically involves the use of multiple Shadow Clones that all perform the same kind of training and then consolidate back into Naruto and bring all that training and experience with them back into him. So the first time he uses his volley of Shadow Clones against Kakuzu, Kakashi comments that he's using them as a simulation. Naruto has like a piece of internal monologue where he also says, okay, I'll need X amount of Shadow Clones based on Kakuzu's strength and speed. That first volley is not intended to inflict damage, it's specifically research. It's specifically learning his opponent, scouting him out, studying him, analyzing him, so that he'll then be able to launch a volley of attacks after that. Now, the second instance of Shadow Clone usage in that fight would have been successful and would have killed Kakuzu if not for the fact that the Rasen Shuriken was still basically an incomplete jutsu and only worked 50% of the time. Naruto had basically made physical contact with Kakuzu, and as long as that attack had worked, he would have killed him. Now, the idea that the Shadow Clones tricked him, yeah, he did. He managed to use deception and trickery in order to create an opening. Deception and trickery and tactical maneuvering are all inherently part of a shinobi's arsenal. So this really isn't an anti-feat for Naruto. It could potentially be an anti-feat for speed, and that a character like Minato might not need to use Shadow Clone diversions if he can basically just teleport directly to an opponent, so you could argue that Naruto's not doing something like that. That being said, he's still able to get in behind Kakuzu while his attention is diverted, and he's still able to create those diversions in the first place. As a thought experiment, let's imagine Pain in a similar situation against Kakuzu. Let's say that the Deva path takes the place of Naruto's real body, and then Pain gets to have as many either other paths or animal path summons present as Naruto has Shadow Clones. How well do you think Pain would do in that situation? Do you think Pain would be able to perform the same sort of maneuvering that Naruto is able to do here? And if so, do you think he'd be able to create an opening to then be able to deal damage to Kakuzu? Personally, I think that second question is a bit more contentious because you have to account for Kakuzu's diamond armor, but keep all that in mind as we proceed to the next point.
Why does that matter if he's thousands of times faster than Naruto?
I'm not saying he's thousands of times faster than Naruto.
If he scales to like KCM, then yeah, he should be.
I'm not saying that he has to be as fast as KCM. Wait, why is KCM thousands of times faster?
Well, I mean, like, if he's 72 times faster than the Raikage, and the Raikage is significantly faster than base Naruto, then
by how much?
That would follow. I mean, I don't know. The 1,000 wasn't really a precise number, but I think it's a fair ballpark number.
Well, even if we were to say they would be in a similar range of speed either way, right?
What? KCM, Naruto, and Kakuzu?
Kakuzu and Pain.
No, I disagree, because Pain blitzed Sage Naruto, and
Can you show me him blitzing Sage Naruto?
There is an instance where Tendo Pain blitzes Naruto, if by blitz you simply mean executes a series of physical attacks that the opponent doesn't have a response for or can't block or evade. You'll often hear this term used interchangeably with speed blitz, which implies that speed is a major component of what makes the attack a blitz. So for example, when Lee takes off his weights in his fight against Gaara, and he's able to land multiple hits on him without Gaara being able to respond to it, that would count as a speed blitz. But that's not quite the same as what the Deva Path is doing to Sage Naruto in this instance. Pain is basically standing still and using ninjutsu to attract Naruto, and then a couple of very simple taijutsu moves to take him down. Which is definitely still a feat, but it's not necessarily a movement speed feat when you're attracting your opponent towards you, rather than doing the maneuvering yourself. So the whole point of this section is just that it's important to define your terms and to make sure that everybody participating in the debate agrees on those terms.
He grabs him by the throat and pins him to the ground and stabs him with chakra rods.
Can you show me that it's a blitz?
Yeah, let me see.
And that he's not just hitting him with attacks? Because they were fighting on par. When Naruto was in Sage Mode, he was...
Also, Jiraiya fired the Kibari Senbon at him, which is stated in the data book to be the fastest Sage Mode attack, and Pain reacted to it easily.
Okay, that just means that Kakuzu would also react to it by a similar scaling to Kakashi.
No, because it's faster than all of Sage Naruto's attacks, because it's the fastest attack in Sage Mode, not in Jiraiya.
Can you show me that statement as well?
Yes.
But I'm just saying that Kakuzu would scale anyway.
I'd like to take a second to look at the Jiraiya versus Pain fight in detail, because there's a lot of useful information we can glean by going through what happened there. So the Kibari Senbon, when Jiraiya uses that move, he's already fused with Ma and Pa, and he says to them that he's basically like a baby compared to them when it comes to using Sage Mode, so fusing with them is obviously a huge benefit to Jiraiya. And to be clear, this isn't just some like flat damage and armor buff that he's getting. Ma and Pa also provide Jiraiya with a host of different tactical benefits. For instance, Ma is able to use her creature detection jutsu to detect the chameleon summon while it's cloaked, thus ending the stalemate with the barrier jutsu. Ma is of course able to grab that same chameleon, and Pa is able to cut it in half with one attack. And of course we have the Frog Song Genjutsu, which is ultimately the thing that Jiraiya is able to use to temporarily gain the upper hand and take the three paths out of the fight. Before using the genjutsu, Jiraiya says, "I had no idea he would be this powerful. I'm gonna die if I keep this up. I need to retreat and come up with a plan." Ultimately, it's the frog song that lets him get the upper hand and turn the tide of the battle. All of these things, of course, are benefits that Kakuzu would not have in the same matchup. But getting back to the Kabari Senbon, Jiraiya does say that it's his fastest and most wide-ranging jutsu, and Pain still responds to it and completely nullifies it. For more context, let's take a look at what actually happens over the course of the fight. So Jiraiya has kicked one of the paths in the eyes, blinding him. Pops throws a smoke bomb, and Jiraiya and the blinded Pain are in the smoke cloud together. Jiraiya tries to punch the blinded Pain from behind, and the blinded Pain manages to block the punch despite being in the smoke. So Jiraiya then jumps out of the smoke bomb behind the animal path, and he's like right behind him, like, I don't know, maybe 10 or 20 feet at most. So Jiraiya launches his fastest attack, potentially the fastest Sage Mode attack, at close range and from behind his opponent, and the animal path is able to think of an appropriate summon, weave the hand signs, and cast the jutsu before the attack can do any damage. And all this with only 3 paths of Pain active and one of them being blinded, which would limit the shared vision ability from the Rinnegan. So this all winds up just reading as one massive reaction feat for Pain.
Anyway, why does Kakuzu scale to be that fast?
Because he's faster than Kakashi, who is capable of reacting to Pain.
Who's much slower than Pain.
So let me ask you, how would you personally scale Kakashi relative to Jiraiya at this point in the series? My personal opinion is that Jiraiya would probably scale above Kakashi, especially in Sage Mode, and especially with the addition of Ma and Pa. Some anecdotal evidence for this is the fact that, well, he's one of the Sannin, Kakashi obviously looks up to him and regards him as a superior ninja. When he fights 1 or 2 of the Pains, Kakashi remarks, "Jiraiya took on 6 of them at once, that's insane." There seems to me to be a very clear implication that Kakashi scales below Jiraiya. There's actually a great video on this topic that goes into much more detail by the YouTuber Six, who compares Jiraiya and Kakuzu directly. I'll leave a link in the description, it's an awesome video, I highly recommend you check it out. With all that in mind, let's turn back to Pain versus Jiraiya. Jiraiya ultimately loses to Pain and dies. He's only able to get the better of these paths with the help of Ma and Pa's genjutsu, so even if Kakashi were significantly slower than Kakuzu, which I don't think is the case, if we agree that Jiraiya is superior to Kakashi, and Pain is able to nullify his fastest, most widest ranging Sage Mode attack, what do you think the implications are for Kakuzu in a similar matchup? Imagine Kakuzu in this exact same scenario, in this exact same matchup, with these exact summons and these specific paths of Pain. How well do you think Kakuzu's performance would compare to Jiraiya's?
Who's much slower than Pain.
He was able to react to Pain.
To a fatigued Pain.
Fatigued Pain? When was he fatigued?
Was busy fighting the whole village?
Why does that mean he's fatigued?
He also only
Would
reacted...
he not also be fatigued against Naruto?
Yes, he was very fatigued against Naruto, and that's one of the best points for Pain.
Okay, but that wouldn't demonstrate that Pain would blitz Kakuzu then, because you're just saying that he's fatigued in both cases.
Full power Pain would blitz Kakuzu then.
How much faster is he when he's not fatigued?
And wait, can you show me scans of Kakuzu being definitively faster than Kakashi? Because Kakashi hits him with a Raikage.
The term fatigued does come up a lot in debates like this, and I think it's worth clarifying since it doesn't always wind up getting a very precise definition. Fatigued seems to imply that the character has either taken enough damage or run out of enough energy that their combat ability has started to decline in a way that's not going to be recoverable without rest or healing. So let's ask the question, do we actually see Pain's speed, strength, and overall combat ability declining significantly over the course of the battle? In other words, when does he become fatigued, and how does that affect him? Specifically, is he fatigued when he's fighting Kakashi, and if so, how does that influence their fight? Of course, it's kind of expected for a given combatant over the course of a fight to use multiple ninjutsu and engage in multiple taijutsu clashes without necessarily experiencing a drop in your overall combat performance. Obviously, individuals with a large chakra pool or a lot of physical stamina will be able to do more before they experience fatigue. So, given Nagato's massive amount of chakra, it could be reasonable for him to use even very highly flashy and expensive jutsu and still not technically be fatigued. We need to look at what actually happens in the fight. We do actually see an example of him being at lower power after he casts the massive Shinra Tensei. The Deva path in particular takes a while to recover its core set of abilities, and Konan even remarks that the other paths are taking longer to recover as well. So it might be fair to say that they're fatigued in a sense during that time period. But what about after those powers have been returned? Is he still fatigued after that point? In other words, is he actually experiencing some kind of combat debuff? Or is he essentially back to fighting form, just with less power in reserve? And more on topic, is he fatigued when he's fighting Kakashi? I don't personally see that there's a noticeable decrease in his speed or combat performance when he's fighting Kakashi. That being said, I think you could very effectively argue that if all of Pain's chakra output and all of his attention were focused on one sole combatant, rather than spread across an entire battlefield, he'd be much more effective against that opponent. So keep that in mind when referencing his fight with Kakashi.
He doesn't have to be much faster than him, he just has to be comparable.
Kakashi could have gotten more powerful between the fight with Kakuzu and the fight
based
with
on
Pain.
what?
Well, I mean, he used more jutsu. He used like the lightning beast running jutsu, so he could have developed.
Well,
more
that
jutsu.
doesn't mean that he's more powerful just because he's using.
I mean, he could have.
Jutsu.
I mean, it implies that he did some training, which could have increased his chakra supply.
So Kakashi is known as the copy ninja. He has access to hundreds if not thousands of individual different techniques that he can use in any given fight. So the fact that we haven't seen this particular jutsu before doesn't mean he necessarily acquired it since the time he fought Kakuzu, or that he's necessarily gotten all that much stronger since that fight either. Now, it's totally reasonable to think that he's been doing some training or keeping himself in shape in the meantime, but if Swag is going to argue for some noticeable power differential, I think he has to substantiate that beyond saying, well, we just haven't seen this jutsu before.
Between the fight with Kakuzu and the fight with Pain, that's how he would have had.
Also,
that's how he would have had to get more jutsu,
okay,
right?
You realize that we're at a position right now where Pain can't even hurt Kakuzu, right?
That's not true. The way he was able to tank the fucking the Bijuu bomb. Well, first of all, you haven't proven that Yugito's Bijuudama is the same as Naruto's Bijuudama, which you calc the multi-continental.
Just as an aside, Parrot says that Pain can't hurt Kakuzu at this point, and I think probably the most compelling argument for Kakuzu is his diamond armor. So I hope that they spend more time getting into the mechanics of that, because that could potentially be a linchpin for how Kakuzu survives some of Pain's deadlier attacks.
Why? Wait, it doesn't. Wait, why? Where are you even getting that from? Who said that I calced?
You said you calced the.
I said that Bijuu bombs have been calced to a multi-continental. Yeah.
Yeah. That's what. And it was Naruto's Bijuu bomb specifically, right? Not Yugito's.
No. When did I say?
Because we never see any of the other Jinchuriki fire a solo Bijuu bomb.
It's Killer Bees actually.
Right, and he could be stronger than Yugito after all. He's stated to be the strongest Jinchuriki.
Yugito was dead when that statement was made.
So for the sake of argument, let's just say that as part of the Jinchuriki starter pack, you get access to a Bijuu bomb that's of a standard size and power. Like every Jinchuriki and Bijuu pair get a level 1 Bijuu bomb cantrip or something like that, and they're all the same power. And let's assume, again for the sake of argument, that when Naruto faces off against the 5 different Bijuu in the war arc, that they're using that standard Bijuu bomb. And if you look at them individually, they appear to be about the same size and shape. They seem to do around the same amount of damage to the environment. So now, looking at the damage done by those Bijuudama, do we have any examples of Kakuzu outputting that kind of destructive force? Even if we assume that Yugito fired one of these things at Kakuzu previously and he tanked it, do we have any concrete examples of Kakuzu being able to actually output destructive force on this scale?
It's stated that Killer Bee actually looked up to Yugito, even though Yugito
Why would they make that statement if it wasn't comparing him to all of the other now dead Jinchuriki when Naruto was the only one who was still alive? Why wouldn't they just say he's stronger than Naruto?
Why isn't that not relevant? wait.
Why would they say strong? Yes, they are all dead.
True? When is the statement made?
It's about B when Sasuke goes to capture him, and all of them are dead.
Maybe this is my own personal bias creeping in here, but I don't really see the point of getting bogged down in the semantic argument. In other words, in my opinion, the correct way to corroborate or dispute a claim like this is to look in the panel, look at the fights, and see what actually happened in the scenes you're discussing, rather than getting mired in an argument over semantics. I definitely think it's useful to use these statements as jumping off points, or to help clarify ambiguous points, but ultimately the primary means for conveying information in this medium is through the events we see depicted on panel. In situations like these, I wonder if it wouldn't be more productive to agree to a ceasefire about the semantics and go look for another example.
Sure, but it could still just mean that he's the strongest Jinchuriki left. It doesn't necessarily.
Why would they not just say he's stronger than Naruto? And they would have to. They would say stronger. They would say stronger.
Why
Jinchuriki.
do they have to?
They would say stronger Jinchuriki since there's only 2 of them, not 3. Ist implies 3 or more, or
No, it
implies
doesn't.
2. Yes, it does.
How does
And when you're comparing a group of 2 things, you say this is the better of the 2. This is the faster of the 2. This is the stronger of the 2, not the strongest.
That's just completely wrong. I'm looking at what the suffix ist actually means, and it does not denote any numerical.
No, but
value
that's
whatsoever.
general, just like English speaking convention.
Once again, I find situations like these a little bit unfortunate, because at the end of the day, regardless of the specific semantics of this particular statement, the statement exists to clarify or support other events and statements that we see depicted throughout the series. I'd actually say that Naruto in particular is great for this because not only are statements iterated multiple times, we'll often hear different versions of those statements made from different characters through their own unique perspectives, which winds up giving us a more complete and nuanced understanding of things than one statement in isolation can convey.
Can you prove that that's the case?
I guess I can't prove it, but it is something that I was taught before, yeah.
I don't think that's the case. I can't find. I searched it right now and I can't find anything about that whatsoever.
Let's see. Est versus The suffix est is normally used when comparing 3 or more items. If I have 3 pigs, I say the fattest one. Yeah, okay.
I mean, once again, yeah, I think Swag is probably correct. This is the linguistic convention. That's normally how it's used. But remember, this is a piece of supplementary material. It's a piece of translated material. And it's worth checking to see how it actually reflects, or indeed if it does accurately reflect, the narrative that it's intended to support.
Did you say est or ist?
What do you mean?
Are you saying est or ist? Because I searched ist.
Est, yes.
Okay, show me the statement. We'll see what it says.
Let me see. Be strongest Jinchuriki.
I do think if you're going to reference a statement and discuss it at length like this, that you should have the statement ready to go if you need to reference it directly.
Normally used does not mean that it's concrete either. You could obviously say strongest of only 2. There's nothing stopping you from doing that. That wouldn't be incorrect at all. By the way, though, actually, there are some Jinchuriki we don't know about as well at the time. Like what their situation is, like Han and Fu, we don't know.
No, I'm pretty sure they were already captured. Because we see the Ghetto Mazo and it has like 7 eyes open.
Oh, that could be true. Yeah. I'm trying to think. When was I'm too tired right now. I'm trying to remember what order things even happened in.
This is sort of not a really important argument, but the fact that you have the Jinchuriki in different order implies that they each one could be potentially stronger than another. And the fact that one did that with tails, and you're also using a scale of like B, who could be much stronger than Yugito. We don't know.
So I'm not really prepared to fully defend this point right now, but I do kind of agree with Swag that narratively there is an implication that the Bijuu are ranked in order of power. Asking a little bit around the community, that also seems to be the general consensus. The most stark piece of evidence that people tend to use for this is that Naruto and B are fighting all the other Bijuu with their Jinchuriki in the war arc, and those Jinchuriki are enhanced with Rinnegan and Sharingan. Kurama also says to Gyuki that, hey, you have the most amount of tails next to me, so why is your performance so bad? And Gyuki answers, just because you have more tails doesn't mean you're more powerful. That's why Shikaku, the one tail, always hated you. So there's some ambiguity there. Another thing I noticed though is that when Hashirama divides up all the different Bijuu to the different nations, he seems to divide them up so that the number of tails is roughly even. Konoha obviously gets the 9 tails, but he sends the 4 tails and the 5 tails to Iwagakure, that adds up to 9. He sends the 3 tails and the 6 tails to Kirigakure, that adds up to 9. He sends the 8 tails and the 2 tails to Kumogakure, when that adds up to 10. And then Shikaku the 1 tails winds up going to the Sand Village. I think this implies that, at least from Hashirama's perspective, the number of tails is correlated to the amount of power that each Bijuu possesses natively, though they might use that more or less effectively in combat, to Gyuki's point. Now, that being said, you of course have to factor in the strength of the Jinchuriki themselves, and also the strength of the bond, the connection, and the transformation link between the Jinchuriki and the Bijuu. So there's plenty of room here for further debate and investigation, I think. I just wanted to provide that information for additional context.
He shouldn't be much stronger than Yugito. I don't know why he would be. The quantification that we have for Yugito, right, is that she is a perfect Jinchuriki.
Also, you're lying about the calc. It's Killer Bee and Naruto's combined Bijuudama. Can you show me?
How do you know I'm lying about the calc?
Well, can you show me the exact calc you're using?
A lot of different points can get thrown out over the course of a debate, and people can either misrepresent certain things, forget what they said, change their mind. That doesn't mean that they're lying. So this isn't very cool of Swag to do, not gonna lie.
I can try and find it.
Because I'm pretty sure I found a note that I made about this before, and it says that it was both of them together.
Even then, even if it's both of them together, they would still be multi-continental, even if we reduce it by 2. It's really high in multi-continental. Here, I'll post. I know the calc. Are you talking about my calc that I did?
I don't know. Maybe it is a calc, the only calc I've seen about this.
That there was a calc for B being multi-continental with the Bijuu Power.
So I want to be totally clear that I haven't personally looked at this external calc. I'm just coming at this whole debate from the perspective of somebody who is a fan of the manga and who is interested in the points that these two individuals are making over the course of this debate, but I would much prefer to focus on the actual events on panel than to refer to external calculations. Though I'm not saying they're wrong or anything, it's just not something that's really within my wheelhouse.
Yes. I have one like that as well, but I'd have to go dig it up. But I know where to find this exact one. I'm pretty sure you're referring to right now because it's on my blog.
Yeah, it's both of them is multi-continental.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That's the calc that you're talking about. But even if it's both of them, that would scale to Killer Bee.
It's irrelevant. Some people in the comments are saying that the calc is bad and has been rejected.
Not a big deal. I know this was probably a quick-fire, impromptu sort of debate, but when possible, it's definitely appreciated if the debaters can provide references or links or scans to this external material, just so everyone's on the same page.
Yeah, but then I debunked why it shouldn't be.
I just thought it was funny. It's okay. Yeah. I'm not calling you out. Go ahead, though.
No, it is funny. I should have not even turned on comments because I didn't want it to be reviewed anyway, but
So if it takes like both of them to be multi-continental, then I think it's weird to say that Yugito is multi-continental.
Okay, hold on. How high into multi-continental do you?
And also, actually, it takes a Bijuu Bomb, a Rasen Shuriken, and a Yasuka Magatama to destroy the Chibaku Tensei. So
I'm not a big fan of what Swag just did here, and he's done it in other debates too. Just as the two debaters here are starting to make a little bit of progress and narrow down on a definition, he then brings up another topic and pivots the debate in that direction. That sort of tactic can be very frustrating because it just derails the conversation. It's definitely an interesting point, and I want to hear them explore it. I just wish it was done more in sequence rather than being interjected like this.
Well, we don't know that that's its upper limit, though. We just know that it did destroy it.
It's definitely... Okay, sure, but that is an argument from ignorance.
For clarification, I don't think that this counts as an argument from ignorance fallacy. The argument from ignorance, also known as the appeal to ignorance, is basically when you make a claim and then if the opponent doesn't have evidence to disprove your claim, you shift the burden of proof onto them. So I might make a claim like, there are invisible aliens living on the moon. My friend then says, well, I don't believe you, what's your evidence? And I respond by saying, well, you prove that they're not there. Can you not prove that they're not there? Now, technically speaking, it's hypothetically possible that there could be some sort of invisible life form living on the moon, but we don't actually have any evidence for it, and if you're going to make that claim, you need to be the one providing supporting evidence for the claim. What Parrot is doing here is just disputing Swag's claim about the upper limit of the Chibaku Tensei.
No, it isn't. Just saying that this was sufficient to destroy it doesn't mean that it's that.
Just saying that Mito could use Naruto's ability does not mean that she can use KCM.
And again, interesting point. I kind of get why it's relevant, but it's also a pivot, and I find it a bit distracting to say the least.
Oh my lord. Okay. No, the point you're saying is that
the only reference point we have are those three things.
That's not a feat. The reason it's not a feat is because the Chibaku Tensei didn't survive.
One Bijuudama wasn't enough to blow it up.
How do we know that?
Because Itachi asked Naruto and B to assist him.
That doesn't mean that one wouldn't be enough.
I mean, but you can't prove that one would be enough.
So ironically, Swag is the one who's making the argument from ignorance fallacy here. Swag is basically saying we don't have proof that each individual attack could have on their own destroyed the Chibaku Tensei. Therefore, they could not have. Therefore, we needed all three of them to destroy it.
I'm just saying that your argument.
We have preponderance of evidence because three people
that's not
did
preponderance
say
of
they had
evidence.
to work together.
It just doesn't follow at all.
The only time we've seen one destroyed is with a Bijuu bomb plus more attacks.
That argument just doesn't even follow at all. That's not even a secondary.
Okay, so why would Kishimoto have put that in the manga?
Can you let me actually fucking say something right now? Good lord.
Go ahead.
You've been consistently interrupting me so much. Okay. So the reason that's not an it's not an you can't say that it's an abductive argument because it doesn't even follow, because just because the Chibaku Tensei was destroyed by this amount does not mean it scales to that amount. It was literally destroyed by that amount. It scaled to it.
Now, let's be real here. I think the narrative implication is that the Chibaku Tensei is so strong that it requires that all three characters use their strongest ability to destroy it. But it's not really possible to tell how much damage was done by each individual attack, especially when you consider that the Chibaku Tensei was incomplete and the gravity core was pulling the attacks in. I think in order to really resolve this, you need to go back and look at the other instances of Chibaku Tensei throughout the series and try to pull together some more evidence. For example, let's recall that Naruto, when he was partially transformed and had 6 tails showing, did fire a Bijuu bomb at the Chibaku Tensei, and that one did absolutely nothing. It's only when he gives himself over to Kurama and has 8 tails showing that he's able to break free, and in that case it's Kurama's body physically forcing itself out of the Chibaku Tensei. In other words, it is technically possible to break free of a Chibaku Tensei with a sufficiently powerful physical attack. But the hard part is connecting that all back to the Pain vs Kakuzu fight. For example, how does the Chibaku Tensei that Nagato casts compare to the one that he used against Naruto? How does the physical force Kurama used to break free compare to Naruto's Bijuudama, and how does it compare to the 3 attacks that are used on Nagato's Chibaku Tensei? And of course, how does that all even relate to Kakuzu and the kind of force that he can output?
I mean, Naruto on his own thought he was fucked, right? He thought he was going to have to go into like 9 tails to break free of it. I don't know, like if he thought B was enough to blow it up, I feel like he would have just fucking said, "Hey B, can you shoot at it?"
I'm not sure what Swag is referring to here when he says that Naruto thought he would need to go into 9 tails mode to break free of it. The conversation I think he's referring to is in chapter 551, page 130, when Naruto is telling Itachi, okay, I faced this thing before, it's a serious threat, and if you get trapped inside of it, then you're a goner. And Itachi responds by saying, well, if it's that dangerous, how come you managed to survive it in the past? How come you're still alive? He then deduces the strategy of having all 3 characters fire their most powerful ranged jutsu, and then the gravitational core will pull the jutsu in towards it. Also, keep in mind, like we said before, that this Chibaku Tensei is not yet fully formed when the characters all throw their attacks at it. Naruto comments about Nagato that his jutsu are out of this world, the implication seeming to be that Nagato on his own is stronger than when Naruto fought Pain previously. So not to sound like a broken record, but scaling this Chibaku Tensei, especially in this incomplete state, can be a little tricky. And that of course has implications for scaling the strength of attacks used on it, and for determining its upper limit.
Why?
Naruto had experienced it before. Naruto had experienced it before.
He didn't know the weakness of it though. Itachi was just like, hey, this is the weakness, we should do this, and then they did it.
Yeah, the gravity core. And Itachi,
yeah.
I mean, Itachi also said everybody should shoot at it.
Yeah, but he hasn't witnessed the jutsu before, he just knows, hey, that's the weakness of it.
Because I know
it's not a feat because you're not demonstrating that it survived it. It didn't survive it.
That's how much it took to blow it up, though.
Okay, this would be like, hey, when Shikamaru's dad was hit by the 10 tails Bijuu bomb, because it killed him, he scales to it.
Yeah, exactly. It's a bit of an extreme example, but the fact that something destroyed something else doesn't necessarily give you direct information as to the upper limit of the durability of that second thing. Doing 1000 damage to a 10 HP enemy and doing 20 damage to that 10 HP enemy will still kill it. and it wouldn't be reasonable to assume that it has 1000 HP just because you used a 1000 HP attack on it and it happened to die.
What I'm saying is I'm making a narrative argument because so the Ten Tails blowing up Shikaku is probably the only reasonable way Kishimoto could have had that happen, because why would because Obito commanded it to blow up the headquarters because he didn't want them to talk back and forth anymore. It just makes sense. That's the most convenient way for him to do it at the time. Whereas with the Chibaku Tensei, Kishimoto could have shown us one character blowing it up, but he didn't. He showed us 3 characters working together to blow it up.
Sure, and to be clear, I think I agree with Swag's interpretation of the narrative here. The problem is that it's tricky to then break that down into any sort of precise scaling.
Okay, but that doesn't mean
I think it's
that's
a fair
what it's
narrative
capable
argument
of.
that it's probably strong enough to withstand an explosion like that.
I think that's just not a non sequitur completely.
Sure,
It
but I don't
follow.
think your skepticism is an argument here.
I'm not being skeptical though. It's just a
Yes, you are. That is
non-sequitur.
literally what you are doing.
Okay, no. Do you know what skepticism is? Do you know what a non sequitur is?
Yes, a non sequitur is something that's irrelevant. I don't think this is irrelevant.
No, that's not what it means. A
Yeah, non sequitur is changing the fucking subject.
No, it isn't. Non sequitur sequitur means something that follows, and non sequitur would mean something that does not follow. So it could be irrelevant, but I'm saying that your logic does not follow because the Chibaku Tensei didn't survive this attack. It was too much for it.
Yet non sequitur is an inference that does not follow from the premises, so it's irrelevant, right? Like irrelevant
that's not the
information,
same.
information that's not related to what you're talking
No,
about.
something not following is not the same as something being
Let's
irrelevant.
not get too caught up on semantics.
Yeah.
I can say that it's a non sequitur because it's not a valid.
I'm not saying
No-
it is
no more
strong enough to
semantics.
withstand all of that. I'm saying that we saw it took 3 fucking attacks to blow it up.
But that's not though.
Yeah.
I can say that it's a non sequitur because it's not a valid.
I'm not saying it is
no more
strong enough to
semantics.
withstand all of that. I'm saying that we saw it took 3 fucking attacks to blow it up.
But that's not though. Shikamaru's dad being killed by the Ten-Tailed
So
Serpent.
I want you to prove to me then that Kakuzu could blow up Chibaku Tensei and stop it from sealing him.
Yeah, I appreciate Swag trying to bring the conversation back down to earth, and I do want to see the debaters resolve this particular point. And specifically, I'd like to see Parrot address this point in greater detail because the Chibaku Tensei is obviously one of the strongest things that Kakuzu is going to have to deal with.
Because you haven't argued
Well,
that he could survive being suffocated by
I'll-
a bunch of earth and rock.
Sure. Well, I don't think that Pain or Nagato even use it in character. It's a last resort that they
That
use
doesn't
in
matter.
the
He
battle.
could. That doesn't matter. We're not arguing in
It does
character.
matter
No,
if he
it-
dies before that.
So Parrot's evidence for the notion that Kakuzu could break out of the Chibaku Tensei is that Pain wouldn't use the Chibaku Tensei. This is funny again because he called out Swag for doing a non sequitur previously, and this seems to me to be a pretty egregious non sequitur. Also, let's examine this claim that the Chibaku Tensei is some sort of last resort attack. True, Pain does use it after he's been pressured. However, it's a decision that he makes tactically with the intention of capturing the Nine Tails. Remember, throughout that entire fight, Pain's intention is to incapacitate Naruto and bring him back alive. Now, it's fair to say that the jutsu is obviously costly and risky, but last resort seems a bit unlikely, especially since the Deva Path was able to continue fighting after this, and Pain had said that he could potentially make an even larger one. Consider also when Nagato uses it later on in the series. Is it a last resort attack in that context? What about when Madara uses it during his fight later on in the series? Is that a last resort attack? Finally, if you believe that this is a last resort attack, and you also believe that Kakuzu has the ability to pressure Pain to the point of potentially even killing him, then doesn't that also imply that Kakuzu would put enough pressure on Pain that he would at some point need to use it? Unless, I guess, he's going to argue that Kakuzu would kill Pain before he even got a chance to use it.
What do you mean?
If he loses before he's able to use that, then it
But
does matter.
So you think Bloodlusted Nagato would win then? Because
Well, that'd
that's
be
not
out of
fair.
character.
So you think Bloodlusted Nagato would win then? Because you didn't say what conditions they were fighting under.
Well, default battle assumptions would be in character. And
So if Nagato uses Chibaku Tensei, Kakuzu loses?
To be fair to Parrot here, it sounded like he was starting to say that maybe Kakuzu could kill Pain before Pain was even able to get the jutsu off. That could be a potential argument. He would need to support that with evidence, and he would need to satisfy the burden of proof on that claim, though.
Not necessarily. I mean, if he has... Okay,
so then why is it relevant whether or not he uses it in
Look at it this way. Kakuzu would have power that the Chibaku Tensei wouldn't scale to, so he should be able to break out of it.
No. Why would he?
Because he scales to multi-continental attacks.
Because he tanked a Bijuudama that you have yet to prove is multi-continental, by the way.
Couple of points to consider here. When Naruto partially transformed during the Pain fight and had 6 tails showing, he also tried to launch a Bijuudama at the Chibaku Tensei while it was still forming. This did absolutely no damage to it whatsoever. Now, you could dispute the fact that that Bijuu Bomb might not scale directly to a fully transformed Bijuu's Bijuu Bomb, but if you feel like they're even in the same ballpark, then yes, we do have an example of the Chibaku Tensei resisting a Bijuudama caliber attack. Also, let's recall that Maratabi's attack wasn't actually a Bijuudama, and that even if it was, it looks like Maratabi's paw swipe actually wound up pushing Kakuzu into the ground underneath the rubble. We see Hidan hiding behind a piece of intact rubble, which implies that it can serve as cover or absorb some of the impact force, which would mean that Kakuzu tanked the paw swipe, but not necessarily the roaring fire attack.
I did prove it's multi-continental.
No, you didn't. You proved a combination of Naruto's Bijuudama, which was stronger than 5 at the same time, 5 which were amped by Obito, by the way, combined with B's was multi-continental. You have not proved that Yu-Gi-To's Bijuudama is multi-continental.
Again, this is why. How high into multi-continental do you think this feat is?
I don't know, but you haven't proven that Yu-Gi-To's
I'll tell you. It's 10. It's times 10 to the 28th power.
Sure.
Which means that it's over 1,000 times into baseline multi-continental. Bear in mind that I'm saying that Chibaku Tensei is small country level, so it'd be nearly 10 orders of magnitude weaker.
Sure.
So even accounting for all those things, Kakuzu would still be way stronger.
Another point to consider is, does the fact that somebody can withstand a certain attack mean that they can output their own attack that would be as strong as the incoming attack? Let's take the example of somebody who has a riot shield, and the riot shield gets hit with a bullet. Does the fact that the riot shield withstood the impact of the bullet mean that the person holding the riot shield would be able to do as much damage as a bullet with a shield bash?
Chibaku Tensei doesn't work like that. It's not in like an AP attack. It sucks you in and kills you by choking you. It's like sealing. It's like a big sealing jutsu.
Well, he would be able to break it with his AP.
Sure, you could classify it as a sealing jutsu, but it's still using physical force to draw opponents into the gravity core. It can also be counteracted by physical force. When Naruto enters his 8 Tails partial transformation, he uses physical force to break free. You could potentially look at that and say, okay, it takes an 8 Tails partial transformation to physically break free, so Kakuzu would have to have strength roughly around the same level in order to be able to break free as well.
I mean, again, you haven't proven that. Because like we don't know the upper limit of the Chibaku Tensei.
But you would have an obligation to prove that he couldn't break it. Why could it just?
You absolutely have to prove that he can to claim that he is.
But I am making an argument that he can based on his power.
What attacks of Kakuzu scale to what he tanked? That's what I want to know.
It should. Well, most of his attacks should scale. His physical attacks should scale direct.
So Kakuzu can use his diamond armor offensively. As an example, he hardens his hand before he breaks down the temple doors to the fire temple, and that causes a pretty significant explosion of force. But the burden of proof still remains on Parrot to specifically scale that force to the durability of the Chibaku Tensei. And Parrot has assumed the burden of proof here because he stated that he's making the argument that Kakuzu could break free. However, there's another way to look at this, namely, Swag could be seen as the person who's making the claim that the Chibaku Tensei would suffocate Kakuzu, and therefore the burden of proof is on him to do the power scaling for the Chibaku Tensei itself. Now, I think you could do that pretty effectively. I think it would still work on Kakuzu, but depending on the way this is all phrased, and depending on who's making the positive claim, the burden of proof may shift, and the nature of the argument may change as well.
Kakashi, like, is Kakashi multi-continental then? Because you said this is many times into multi-continental, so just because he has the, like, elemental advantage, it shouldn't really matter.
Well, he has to use the Earth Spear.
So yeah, it's clear that Parrot is making the positive claim here that Kakuzu can output multi-continental attacks. But even if he had tanked a full-scale Bijuudama from Yukito, just looking at his taijutsu and ninjutsu feats over the series, has he ever output anything even coming close to a multi-continental attack? To paraphrase Swag's point, if Kakuzu's physical attacks can output multi-continental levels of power, and Kakashi and Asuma manage to survive kicks from Kakuzu, does that mean that they have multi-continental resistance?
Jutsu.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter that Kakashi has an advantage. Is he multi-continental? Because you said that this feat is many times into multi-continental.
Wait, why would Kakashi then be multi-continental? I just said he has to use Earth Spear.
What do you mean? No, Kakuzu doesn't have to use Earth Spear. Wait, what is Earth Spear?
Earth Spear is like his diamond armor that makes him more powerful and being.
That is how he tanked it. That is how he tanked the fucking Bijuu bomb.
Not to be too pedantic, but we technically don't see Kakuzu activate his diamond armor when he blocks Maratabi's Pass Wipe. I believe Noodles actually used that as an argument in one of his videos to suggest that Kakuzu's base durability was enough to withstand the attack without the use of diamond armor at all. I'm pretty skeptical of that claim. I think the implication is that he did activate it, but technically speaking, it's not actually shown on panel. You know, we don't actually see his hands hardening, and we don't get the onomatopoeia associated with it, in the same way that we see when he blocks the paper bomb, or when he hardens his hand before punching through the Fire Temple Iron Gate.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Sure, right. So the fact that Kakashi was able to pierce this multi-continental armor with a Raikage should make him multi-continental.
Not necessarily. The Raikage utilized the
doesn't
weakness. Well, it completely deconstructed the jutsu, so that does matter.
It doesn't completely deconstruct the jutsu, it just is strong against it.
If it's a weakness of it, but that just disconnects the scaling by default.
So, I mean...
Even if I said the Raikiri was multi-continental, how would that help you?
Because the Asura Path tanked it, which would make Chibaku Tensei more...
Wait, when did the Asura Path tank the Raikiri?
It went in front of Kakashi before he hit Tendo with it.
Yeah, but didn't it just die?
No! It almost killed Choji, and Kakashi had to kill himself afterwards.
Well, it was damaged by it, right? It didn't tank it.
It was damaged, less damaged than Kakuzu. Kakuzu died. Kakuzu died. He had to sacrifice one of his 5 lives.
Let me find this game.
So I feel like Swag is potentially mischaracterizing this part of the fight. Remember that Kakashi uses a lightning clone to initially attack the Asura Path, and then immediately afterwards, Choza comes in with his expansion jutsu active and punches the Asura Path, driving it down into the ground. Then, when Kakashi's using his coordinated attack with Choji and Choza, he tries to hit the Deva Path with a Raikiri, and the Asura Path jumps in front of him. Kakashi is surprised to see that it's still functional. He then has to force the Raikiri through the Asura Path, after which the Deva Path uses Almighty Push. That Almighty Push, of course, pushes the Asura Path back along with Kakashi. It also has the effect of incapacitating, if not outright mortally wounding Kakashi, and also mortally wounding Choza, in addition to pushing back Choji and all the other miscellaneous ninja in the scene. At the time that the Almighty Push is used, the Asura Path isn't necessarily completely destroyed, which leads me to believe that the Almighty Push partially contributes to the destruction of the Asura Path. In other words, it's probably fair to say that the Asura Path tanked a lightning clone and a punch from Choza and the Raikiri and was ultimately destroyed by the Almighty Push, which would add more context to the durability of the Asura Path. So the Asura Path is even more durable than Swag is implying. But on the other hand, so is Kakuzu. Swag saying that Kakuzu died after one hit, to me is a little facetious. Kakuzu was briefly incapacitated, but then he got back up after a very short delay. We see the same thing happening after he loses his second heart to Shikamaru exploiting Hidan's ritual. Specifically, he falls down on the ground, but then very quickly either gets up to kick Kakashi in the chest in the first case, or gets up and uses his tentacles to grab Kakashi, Choji, and Ino all at once in the latter example. So the defensive feats that both Kakuzu and the Asura Path display in this instance are both greater than what Swag is describing. I don't think it's really fair to say that Kakuzu died when he basically falls down and then gets up a couple seconds later. Yes, he loses one of his hearts, but his life as a whole is comprised of multiple hearts, so saying he died is a little much.
The Asurapath lived and fired a missile barrage at Choji.
It was
less damage.
It didn't tank it. It didn't tank it though. It was hurt by it.
It's not really accurate to say that the Asurapath fired a missile barrage. It was nearly completely destroyed, and it managed to get off one final attack before it completely collapsed, that being a single missile. There's actually a direct parallel between the state of the Asurapath and the state of Kakashi in this fight. The Asurapath is almost dead and manages to fire off that one last missile. Kakashi is almost dead and manages to fire off that one last Kamui, which nullifies the missile, after which they both die or are destroyed.
Sure, so it didn't tank it, but it was hurt by it, but it was less hurt than Kakuzu.
Its durability
Kakuzu
wouldn't
died.
scale then. Its durability wouldn't scale then.
What do you mean? Kakuzu
Because
died.
it didn't tank the attack. It was hurt by the attack. Its
But
durability.
Kakuzu also was, and he was more hurt because it fucking killed him.
Utilizing a weakness. It also didn't.
So you think that this weakness is so how much do you think this weakness affects things then?
Something that can be a little bit frustrating about these debates is that people advocating for Kakuzu in this matchup will say that the diamond armor is virtually impenetrable, and then when things like the Rasen Shuriken or Raikiri are brought up, their rejoinder is that those attacks had very specific exceptional qualities that allowed them to bypass the armor, the implication being that these were exceptions to the rule, and since Pain doesn't have any similar exceptions, he wouldn't be able to get past the armor. What I would appreciate is hearing more detail about how that diamond armor is going to match up against other various attacks that don't necessarily have those exceptions, and I'd appreciate it here if Parrot were able to put forth some positive claims about the strength of the armor itself. Come to think of it, Kakuzu himself says that the jutsu gives him virtual immunity to physical attacks. Emphasis on the word physical there. I think Swag actually brought this up in another debate, that the Almighty Push should have the ability to negate all ninjutsu, and since the diamond armor counts as ninjutsu, there's an argument to be made that Pain could just nullify the jutsu outright. Also, as a more subjective narrative argument, there are a lot of characters who say that they have invincible strategies or impenetrable defenses over the course of the series, but their opponents don't necessarily take that for granted and find ways to exploit weaknesses or circumvent the defenses and get through them nonetheless. So given everything we know about Nagato as a shinobi, do we think that he would be able to somehow use the suite of abilities that he has at his disposal and his cunning to find some way around this particular defense that Kakuzu had? Even if Kakuzu is able to negate all physical damage, is there some other way that Pain could find to still hurt him?
Well, for instance, when we look at like wind and fire style, wind style actually makes fire style more powerful. It's completely
yes, I know.
Against
yes, I know.
So a similar relationship to exist.
So the thing is, we can't really quantify how much it how much that affects things. So unless you can, the Asurapath scales relatively to Kakuzu.
No, he doesn't. I don't have to quantify it. The fact that it's not quantifiable is an argument in my favor, because you wouldn't be able to then say that the Raikiri should be on that level.
Yeah, this is kind of tricky because it's a little difficult to quantify just how much of a bonus Kakashi gets due to the fact that his Raikiri has an elemental advantage. I think in order to resolve it, you would need to go back and look at other examples of defensive feats for the diamond armor and try to get a general scaling for how strong it is at a baseline. Look at Kakashi's feats with the Raikiri, get a sense of how strong that is at a baseline against opponents who don't have that elemental disadvantage, and then make an argument based on all that data together.
So hold on. Do you think that that base Naruto with Rasen Shuriken is stronger than Six Tails Naruto with Bijuudama?
No, I already explained.
Six Tails Naruto couldn't break out of Chibaku Tensei. Why could Kakuzu?
Again, because the Rasen Shuriken is different. It is a ability that ignores conventional durability on a cellular level, and also, by the way,
then why didn't it beat the third Raikage? Why did it completely unaffect
Because his
Madara?
lightning armor allowed him to survive it, or his actual body was durable enough, which is what
But if his lightning armor allowed him to survive it, then why does Kakuzu being weak to lightning matter when lightning is weak to wind and Naruto threw a
that
wind
just means
jutsu
that
at
the
him?
third Raikage's lightning armor is better.
Yeah, absolutely. The third Raikage's armor is incredibly strong. He just scales above Kakuzu, at least in defense.
Sure. So then why do you have
And also-
Kakuzu above the Raikage on your list?
Well, I don't anymore. Wasn't that changed?
No.
I thought I said that.
This would make the
relative is
Raikage way stronger than Kakuzu.
No, it wouldn't.
If the
No, it wouldn't.
Raikage can
No,
tank
it wouldn't. Hold on.
fucking Rasen Shuriken,
Oh my-
which he is weak against, and Kakuzu can't tank a Raikiri from Kakashi pre-war, who is much weaker, just because he's weak against it, then yes, the third Raikage should be way above Kakuzu.
Yeah, keep in mind that the third Raikage is fighting against a much more powerful version of Naruto during the war arc. Naruto also has support from multiple other ninja who are present in that fight, and despite all that, Naruto can't do anything to damage the third Raikage at first. It's also implied that the Eight Tails didn't even manage to damage the third Raikage in their fight. In both of those situations, Naruto versus the Raikage and the Raikage versus the Eight Tails, it's the Raikage's own attack diverted back onto himself that's the only thing from which he actually sustains damage. Now, this could be a whole other debate, feel free to challenge me on this if you disagree, but yeah, the third Raikage is way stronger than Kakuzu.
You done?
Yeah, sure.
Can I say something now? Because you keep
Sure.
constantly over-talking me.
Sure, go for it.
And I'm really tired right now, so it's hard for me to concentrate as well. Okay. No. Firstly, the lightning armor could simply provide a durability that is different than what the stone grudge or the earth spear, represents, right? So it's vulnerable to this cellular attack, whereas the Raikage isn't. And actually, Raikage's base could just be superior to Kakuzu's base, because if
Then
both
what-
of their armors are being eliminated, that just means Raikage's base is better, but that doesn't mean his overall durability is.
Absolutely, there are a lot of different components that make up a character's total durability, which can include everything from the toughness of their skin, to additional layers of physical or magical armor, or abilities that negate incoming damage entirely. When evaluating a character's total durability, it's important to distinguish between those components and evaluate them each individually, as well as evaluating the total summed durability based on the combination of those factors.
Why couldn't Kakuzu dodge base Naruto if he's faster than Pain?
Well, the first time he did, but then he got tricked.
No,
using shadow
he
clones
didn't.
and
No,
hit
he
from
didn't.
behind.
No, he didn't. I have the scan right here. Naruto hits him twice.
Without retreading this whole topic, remember, Naruto basically does the same thing 3 times in a row. His first Shadow Clone sortie is intended as a simulation to specifically study his opponent, not to go in for the kill. The second volley was successful in that he managed to make contact with Kakuzu and would have killed him if not for the fact that the Rasen Shuriken happened to fizzle out. And on the third attempt, once again, making only a minor variation to his overall strategy, he was able to connect against his opponent, effectively killing him. He accomplishes all this using a very small number of Shadow Clones, fewer individual bodies than Pain has access to for sure. I think it's reasonable to assume that given Nagato's skill, his experience, and the amount of pawns he has at his disposal, that he would also be able to create a similar feint or diversion that would give him an opening for an attack, especially considering other things like the shared field of vision with the Rinnegan.
Go ahead, Jimmy.
He doesn't tank it. The fucking Rasen Shuriken fizzles.
Yes, I'm aware of that as well. But then he
So
also
he hits him twice. Meaning that Naruto. So okay.
Can
How
we have this
fast
debate
do you
another
think-
time? I'm really phasing out right now. It's literally 1 a.m.
Okay, so you concede? You concede
I'm
on
not
this debate?
conceding. I'm
No,
saying...
we can have a round 2 later, but you have to concede.
So I'm going to end my commentary here because for the remainder of the debate, it's essentially just Swag being a little unkind to Parrot. Parrot wants to leave the debate because he's tired, and Swag wants to insist that that gives him some kind of a victory, or that Parrot has to concede before he, returns to his life. Personally, I don't find that very impressive. I do understand that tempers can flare during these debates and people can get worked up, but if your opponent requests a pause or a reschedule, you shouldn't take that as a victory. It's weird because I do think that overall, despite misrepresenting a couple of things, or at least presenting some points that I disagree with, overall I think Swag has the stronger position here. If I had to pick a winner for the debate, I probably would pick Swag, but I can't really say that I support the way that he's handling this debate's conclusion. Look, I know these debaters have history. It's a history into which I don't have a lot of context, and I don't really feel like I should be taking sides, or that I should be stoking the fires of centuries-old drama. I'll just say that as a spectator to all this, it was kind of disappointing to see the way that this debate concluded, especially when you consider the way that Parrot has been represented by that uh-oh stinky monkey on Swag's channel, and the way that Swag's summary video was edited. It felt kind of unfair to Parrot overall. All that being said, I will of course leave links in the description in case you want to check out the full debate yourself and see how it concludes. In the meantime, I want to thank you sincerely for sticking with me for this long. I really love talking about this stuff, and the whole process of making this video has helped me develop an even deeper appreciation for these characters and these scenes. That being said, there's plenty of room for subjectivity and interpretation in any of these discussions, so please don't take my word for any of this. I encourage you to go and read the source material and come to your own conclusions. And of course, if you disagree with anything I've said here, I would love to hear your thoughts, whether that be in the form of a comment or even a video of your own. So that's going to do it for me. Thank you again for your time and your attention. I hope you have a wonderful day and hope to talk to you again soon.